Hi, Paul Thompson here from Spitfire Audio. Season's greetings to you. We're going to be talking about the octatonic scale today. It's going to be a short one, but I'm going to try and pack in as much information as I possibly can. So, what is the octatonic scale? It first, we think it originated in Persia in the 7th century AD. That's the earliest records we can find of it. Where it was referred to as the string of pearls because of the alternating sizes. Now, it can be found in music from all over the world. From the Western classical tradition, you will see mentions, quotes from it in Bach, Beethoven, everything from Tchaikovsky, Mussorgsky, Bartok, Kodály. It appears all over the place. It's a scale with two modes and it alternates semitones and whole tones. So half step and whole step. So kind of like this. So we start on a G, then we go G sharp, A sharp, B, C sharp, D, E, F, G. So you can see there we've got the half step followed by the whole step. Until we get back to that G. And obviously the alternate version is to start with a whole tone and then do a half step. Then whole tone, half step, whole tone, half step, whole tone, half step. Okay, so try and keep that in your head. Now, what makes this really useful is the fact that within that scale, if we go back to our first one, the G starting with a semitone, with a half step, you'll see just in the first few notes that we immediately have both the minor third and the major third. And you'll find that because this is a repeating pattern scale, that happens every minor third you go up, you have this amazing opportunity to kind of mash together diminished chords, major chords, minor chords. There's all kinds of stuff in here. If you, let's just look at the scale. I'm going to play it with both hands again. Okay, now you can see we've got, or indeed, and you can do E minor. So these three chords, if I play them like that, or, and indeed, you can see that it's very, very flexible. There's lots and lots of stuff you can do. Now, I've done a quick example here, which I'll play, which is, I'm going to give you two examples. The first one is using it in some kind of fast, flurry, action type vibe. And this is all over the place in film. You'll find it in John Williams scores. You'll find it in Silvestri scores, especially Back to the Future. You'll find it in Goldsmith, in Total Recall. So it's all over the place. Have a quick listen, and then I'll just show you quickly what I'm doing. Okay, get the idea. Now, I'm going to show you something as well that you can use to cheat. So you don't have to be proficient in your octatonic scale playing. And trying to keep all that stuff in your head. Obviously, it's great to work things out and to kind of, have an intention behind what you're doing. But if you just want to experiment and get a feel for it and maybe come up with some ideas, improvising and conforming the keyboard to the octatonic scale, then you can use this little plugin called the transposer. And I think I popped it on the strings just to demonstrate. So we simply put it in here as a MIDI plugin and we set the scale that we want to use. And I'm saying allow these notes and don't allow C, D sharp, F sharp or A. Now, the sharp-eyed amongst you will notice that in itself is a diminished chord. So there's all kinds of fantastic patterns and crazy stuff going on in here. But the advantage of doing this is that you can then play. And you can play in kind of shapes or directions or patterns, and it will make sure that the only things that sound are the octatonic scale. So what I've done here with the strings, I've got super simple. I'm just using here the spiccatos in the violins, and then in the violas, what are we using? I'm using the pizzicato in the violas, spiccato in the cellos and pits in the basses. That's so that I can have two separate kind of patterns. I can have the faster thing going on in the spiccato part, and I can have this kind of bum 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 bum. So I'm kind of constantly push pull forward backwards all the time. So that on its own sounds like this. That's the strings. That gives me that kind of bass, that kind of background thing. I've got some brass. So I start off with a bit of kind of, marcato at the beginning, tubular bell and the timps. In fact, let me just play the brass on its own. If we look at some of this stuff and you just have a quick look through. So we've got that low C sharp in the bass bones. We do occasionally use out of key notes so that they are not in that octatonic scale. So if you recall that octatonic scale, played on this bizarre sforzando. So we're using this E flat, which is not part of the octatonic scale that we're in. And if we look at what the basses are doing at that point, so let's just go to bar 6 so you can see. Tubas are doing this pattern here. So it's just that E flat that's not in there. And again, with the bass bones, we are, we're using that E flat. Again, it's the disallowed E flat. So the trumpets do this. What's happening here? It looks a bit odd, but we'll work it out. It looks a bit odd on the old Logic transcription. But we've got here essentially E major, and that is. That's all good in our octatonic. We've got B flat major, and again, yeah. So that's all good. We've got E minor, and again, that's all good. All the notes there are in. They're all in our octatonic scale, and G minor again, as we talked about earlier. So we're kind of contrasting very quick harmonic changes, but they're all within the octatonic scale, so they sound like they fit naturally in the kind of key center that we've created. What else is going on down here? Well. So in the timps, you'll notice, again, we're punching through that E flat, which is not in the scale. But with the xylophone, now that's all good. We're all happy with those notes. Those are all in the octatonic. And then, so here, again, all in the octatonic, but we've got that kind of diminished feel, so that's all kind of fun there. So just one more quick listen through before we go on to the other example. So here's an example of doing something kind of more mysterious and slow moving. I've gone for that kind of Goldsmith 80s vibe sound-wise in the production, in that you tend to have that sound of the orchestra recorded in quite a dry room, but where like giant reverbs have been dialed onto everything to give it this kind of big, lush sort of space. Let me play it down and then I'll show you what I'm doing. I've got my little cheat deck here as well, so we're using the same octatonic scale. Let's have a quick look at what's going on here. So you can hear that rather beautiful reverb going there. I'll work my way backwards. So what am I doing at the end here? I'm trying to use stuff that's kind of, gives me that kind of era. So I've got a Fairchild compressor and then the lovely Abbey Road TG mastering plugin. And they're just doing I've tweaked this a little bit from the preset, but using the preset as a starting position. They're not doing much. They're just kind of giving it a little bit of a kind of, just a little bit of softness, a little bit of a kind of vibe there. The reverb wise, I'm using this fabulous Lexicon 480 simulation. And you can see I'm using the random hall to give me that kind of modulation of the tail that was very, very popular back in the 80s. And a slightly larger tail, a kind of 2.7 second there. So everything else is pretty much just as it loads up. So what's going on here? So I'm using, again, I've got my transposer set on all of the strings, I think. Let me just double check. I'm using the Consordino or muted. That's, again, very popular. Sultasto, playing with the bow, playing over the fingerboard. So you get that nice soft kind of, again, it's kind of, it leads towards the Sordino. It's changing the harmonic kind of makeup or balance of the notes that you're playing, because you're playing in a slightly different position on the string. So certain harmonics are suppressed and certain ones are exaggerated. So that's quite a nice combination, those two. Got some trems, consort in the violas, and then the cellos and basses are playing legato. And actually, if I just highlight that, you can see that they're kind of doing this kind of interweaving thing, but they finally end up on the same notes here. But let's play the strings on their own, just so you can hear what's going on there. And as you can see, I'm really giving plenty of kind of Wellian control to the modulation and the expression controls, so that I'm really shaping those sounds as much as I can, getting a really nice musical performance. Now, let's come back to the trumpet. I'm going to come back to that. The other stuff down here, we've got, again, I've got that transposer on there. Oh, I didn't use it on there. And on the tuba legato, I've not used it, so let's just have a quick look. We've got that E flat again. I've obviously got a thing about that, but all the other notes are in the same scale. The E flat again in the bass bones, but then the tenor bones are following the scale because they're using the transposer. Everything else pretty straightforward. There's nothing really sort of staggering in there. But what I'm doing in the trumpet, as you can see, we start in the scale, we move up, we're still in the scale here, and then we're really, really accentuating that E flat out of the scale. I'm using that as a transition point in that it's a very kind of Goldsmith thing. If I just play the lead up to there. And having that non-scale note poking out through everything, and then it's a little bit reinforced in the lower brass. But having that non-scale, it's a nice way of breaking up the feeling of the octatonic scale. So I'm not saying, when we use the octatonic scale, I'm not saying everything has to be in the scale. Absolutely not. You can pick and choose, and you'll find that certain notes will work better to rub against what you're playing and certain notes won't. I've obviously really hooked onto that E flat. But yeah, it's again, there's no kind of rule around this. It's just a way of helping you to access a different harmonic space to write something that maybe you wouldn't immediately come up with. And it has such an incredible lineage, as I say, all the way back to Persian classical music, that gives you something that is really nice, characterful, slightly different from the kind of run-of-the-mill stuff you'll hear. And because you can change and use all of these different chords, triads in there, and the diminished chords as well, it gives you enormous flexibility and for writing, especially filmically, because you don't have to, it doesn't feel like you're in a key center. And that gives you, in terms of moving around when you need to kind of arrive somewhere slightly different maybe, or for action music, of juxtaposing all of these different chords really fast. It just sounds great. Really, really useful thing to do. So I hope that's been helpful. And I said it was going to be short, and maybe I rambled on a little bit too long, but there we go. Season's greetings. Look forward to seeing you on the next one. Bye-bye.